My name is Chen, and for 3 years, I've been the ghost in Professor Mitchell's advanced literature class. You know the type, always sitting in the back corner, never raising my hand, practically melting into the wooden chair whenever he asked questions. But here's what nobody knew. I wasn't just another struggling student trying to pass. I was watching, analyzing, learning everything about him. Professor David Mitchell was different from other teachers. While they droned on about curriculum requirements, he spoke about books like they were living, breathing entities. When he discussed Sylvia Plath, his eyes would light up with genuine passion. When he explained the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, you could feel the electricity in the room. He made literature come alive, and for someone like me who lived more in books than in reality, he was magnetic. But there was something else I noticed, something the other students missed because they were too busy texting or daydreaming about weekend parties. Professor Mitchell was lonely. I could see it in the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he lingered after class as if hoping someone would ask him a meaningful question, how he sometimes stared out the window with this distant, melancholic expression. I started staying after class, pretending to organize my notes while secretly observing him. He'd sit at his desk, correcting papers with mechanical precision, occasionally pausing to rub his temples. Sometimes he'd pull out his phone, stare at it for a moment, then put it away without making a call. I wondered who he was thinking about calling. A wife? A girlfriend? Or was he, like me, fundamentally alone? The semester was ending and I knew this was my last chance. 4 weeks I'd been rehearsing what I wanted to say, playing out different scenarios in my head. My heart would race every time I imagined approaching his desk, every time I pictured those intelligent brown eyes looking directly at me instead of through me. But fear always won and I'd slip out of the classroom like smoke, invisible as always. Today felt different though. As the final bell rang and students rushed out, chattering about their weekend plans, I remained seated. My hands were shaking as I gathered my courage. Professor Mitchell was packing his briefcase, humming softly, a melancholy tune I didn't recognize. This was it. My moment. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked toward his desk. Professor Mitchell? My voice came out as barely a whisper. He looked up, surprised to see me still there. For a moment we just stared at each other and I felt the weight of all those months of silent observation, of unspoken words, of missed opportunities. Sarah, isn't it? Professor Mitchell said, and I was shocked he knew my name. In 3 years I couldn't remember him ever calling on me directly. What can I help you with? My rehearsed speech evaporated. All those carefully planned words scattered like leaves in the wind. Instead, what came out of my mouth surprised even me. Since you can't ignore me anymore, will you give me a chance? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. His expression shifted from polite teacher interest to something more complex. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even a hint of recognition. He set down his briefcase and really looked at me for the first time. I'm not sure I understand, he said carefully, but I could tell he understood more than he was letting on. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of awareness that made my heart skip. I've been watching you, I said, the words tumbling out faster now. Not in a creepy way, I promise. But I've seen how you light up when you talk about poetry, how you get excited about metaphors and hidden meanings. I've also seen how you look when you think no one's paying attention. You're lonely, aren't you? He stepped back slightly, his professional mask sliding back into place. Sarah, I think perhaps you're misinterpreting. No, I interrupted, surprising myself with my boldness. I'm not misinterpreting anything. I've spent my whole life being invisible, Professor Mitchell. I know what loneliness looks like because I've been living it. But here's the thing, I also know what passion looks like, what intelligence looks like, what kindness looks like. And you have all of those things. His face went through a series of expressions, surprise, concern, something that might have been recognition, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness. He walked to the window, staring out at the campus quad where students were laughing and rushing to their next adventures. You don't know me, Sarah, he said quietly. You see what you want to see. Do I? I moved closer, my fear replaced by something stronger, determination. I know you grade papers until late at night because I've seen your office light on when I walk to the parking garage. I know you eat lunch alone in your office because I've never seen you in the faculty lounge. I know you drive the same route home every day, and I know you stop at that little bookstore on Maple Street every Friday after work. He turned to face me, and for the first time I saw real surprise in his eyes. How do you know all that? Because I pay attention. Because for 3 years, you've been the most interesting thing in my world and I've been completely invisible to you. Until now. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken possibilities and dangerous territory. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What exactly are you asking for, Sarah? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would either change both our lives or end in complete disaster. I'm asking for a chance to show you that there's someone who sees you, really sees you. Not Professor Mitchell the teacher, but David the man who quotes Neruda under his breath and gets lost in Beethoven's symphonies. His eyes widened. How did you? Your office door was open last Tuesday. You were listening to the Ninth Symphony while grading papers and you whispered, if you forget me, I want you to know one thing. It's from Neruda's, If You Forget Me. I looked it up. Professor Mitchell, David, ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make hundreds of times when he was processing something complex. Sarah, even if what you're suggesting wasn't completely inappropriate, you don't understand the complications. I'm your teacher. There are rules, boundaries. The semester ends in 2 weeks, I said quickly. After that, I'm not your student anymore. And I'm 22, not 18. I've been working full-time while going to school part-time. I'm not some naive kid with a crush. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. For 3 years I'd been Sarah in the back row, Sarah who never speaks, Sarah the invisible. But standing here having this conversation, I felt like I was finally becoming real. There's something you should know, he said finally, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. About why I keep to myself, why I don't connect with people. Tell me. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. 5 years ago I was married. My wife, Elena, was brilliant, beautiful, full of life. She was a writer working on her first novel. We had plans, dreams. He paused, staring at his hands. She died in a car accident on her way to meet with a publisher. A drunk driver ran a red light. My heart ached for him. This explained so much. The sadness I'd observed, the walls he'd built around himself. I'm so sorry. After that, I threw myself into teaching, into my research. It was easier than dealing with people with connections with the possibility of loss. I convinced myself I was better off alone. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where hundreds of students had received grades and feedback over the years. But this felt different, intimate somehow. You've been alone for 5 years? Completely. No dates, no relationships, barely any friendships. Just work and solitude. He looked up at me and I saw vulnerability in his eyes that took my breath away. So you see, Sarah, even if this weren't ethically complicated, I'm not sure I remember how to connect with someone. Then let me remind you, I said softly. The words hung between us like a promise, a challenge, a leap of faith. Outside, the afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the classroom. In that golden light, something shifted between us. A recognition, an acknowledgement of possibility. If I were to consider this, he said carefully, it couldn't happen until after graduation. And it would have to be our secret until then. My heart leaped. You're considering it? I'm considering that maybe, just maybe, someone who's been watching me closely enough to know my habits might also be someone worth knowing in return. The next 2 weeks were the longest and most exhilarating of my life. On the surface, nothing changed. I remained the quiet student in the back row, and Professor Mitchell continued his passionate lectures about literature and life. But underneath, everything was different. There were secret glances, subtle smiles, moments of connection that felt electric. He started incorporating little signals into his lectures. References that only I would understand, quotes that seemed directed specifically at me. When he discussed Pride and Prejudice, he lingered on Elizabeth Bennet's courage in challenging social conventions. When he analyzed Jane Eyre, he emphasized the power of seeing beyond surface appearances to someone's true character. I found myself arriving early to class, lingering afterward, creating opportunities for brief conversations that felt loaded with subtext. He'd ask about my understanding of a particular passage, and I'd give responses that showed I'd been thinking deeply, not just about the literature, but about what he'd been trying to convey. Your analysis of Gatsby's Green Light was particularly insightful, he said after one class, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes warm. I've been thinking about symbols of hope lately, I replied, and we both knew I wasn't just talking about Fitzgerald. The day before graduation he asked me to stay after class. My heart hammered as the room emptied, leaving us alone with possibility hanging in the air like morning mist. Tomorrow changes everything, he said, not quite looking at me. Are you having second thoughts? Every day. He turned to face me fully. But not for the reasons you might think. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I haven't felt anything for 5 years. I'd convinced myself I was incapable of it. But these past 2 weeks, knowing someone was really seeing me, knowing there was this connection. You feel it too, I said, not a question but a statement. I feel terrified, he admitted. I feel like I'm betraying Elena's memory. I feel like I'm taking advantage of your youth, your inexperience. But yes, I feel something I thought was dead. I moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with coffee and old books. Can I tell you something that might surprise you? He nodded. I've never had a real relationship either. Not because of tragedy like yours, but because of fear, because of feeling invisible, because no one ever saw me the way you're starting to see me now. So we're both scared, both inexperienced in our own ways. Maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's what makes this special. His hand moved toward mine, stopping just short of contact. After graduation tomorrow, if you still want to explore this, would you have dinner with me? Somewhere off campus, somewhere we can talk without worrying about appearances. Yes, I said without hesitation. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying our conversation, the look in his eyes, the almost touch of his hand. I imagined what it would be like to sit across from him at a restaurant, not as student and teacher but as Sarah and David, two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. I walked across that stage feeling like I was stepping into a new life. When they called my name and I accepted my diploma, I looked out into the audience and found his eyes. He smiled, not his careful teacher smile but something real and warm and full of promise. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and took pictures, I found myself alone for a moment near the library. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Congratulations, Sarah. His voice was different now, warmer, less formal. Thank you, Professor Mitchell. I emphasized his title playfully. I think you can call me David now. David. His name felt strange and wonderful on my lips. So, about that dinner. But before he could respond, a voice called out behind us. David? David Mitchell. We both turned, and I watched the color drain from his face as a woman approached. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair who was looking at him with a mixture of joy and concern. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said, his voice tight. What are you? How did you? I've been looking for you for 2 years, she said gently. We need to talk. The woman's presence changed everything. I could feel David's entire body tense beside me, could see years of carefully constructed walls snapping back into place. But there was something else in his expression. Not just shock but recognition, maybe even guilt. Sarah, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the woman, I need to handle this. Can we postpone dinner? But Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward with a gentle smile. Actually, I think Sarah should hear this too. After all, she's part of why I'm here. My blood ran cold. Part of why you're here? I don't understand. I've never seen you before in my life. She studied my face with eyes that seemed familiar somehow, though I was certain we'd never met. My dear child, you look so much like her. More than I expected from the photographs. Like who? I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, a terrible understanding began to creep in. David's face had gone ashen. Sarah, I think you should sit down. No, I said firmly. No, I want to know what's happening. Who is this woman and what does she have to do with me? Mrs. Rodriguez reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellow with age. My name is Maria Rodriguez. I was Elena Mitchell's best friend and I was with her the day she died. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Elena. David's wife. Yes. But there's something David never knew, something Elena made me promise to keep secret until I could find the right time to tell him. She looked between us, her eyes sad but determined. Elena was pregnant when she died. David made a sound like he'd been physically struck. That's impossible. She would have told me. We were trying for a baby but she wasn't. She had just found out that morning. She was on her way to the publisher, yes, but she was also planning to stop and buy something special to tell you with. She was going to surprise you that evening. Maria's voice was gentle but unwavering. The accident happened before she could share the news. But what does this have to do with Sarah? David asked, though I could see he was beginning to understand, just as I was beginning to understand something that made my stomach drop. Maria turned to me. The paramedics were able to save the baby. Elena died on impact, but you survived. You were born premature but healthy. Elena had made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I would make sure you were placed with a loving family. The Chen family had been on the adoption waiting list for years. The graduation cap fell from my numb fingers. You're saying You're Elena's daughter. David's daughter. The world went completely silent. I could see David's mouth moving, could see Maria still talking, could see other graduates and families celebrating in the background, but I couldn't hear anything over the roaring in my ears. Everything suddenly made sense in the most horrible way possible. The way I'd been drawn to David, the connection I'd felt, the familiarity of his mannerisms. The way he'd sometimes look at me with a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. The way I'd been unconsciously seeking his approval, his attention, his love. I've been watching you from a distance, Maria continued, making sure you were safe and happy with your adoptive family. When I saw you'd enrolled in the same university where David taught, I thought it was just coincidence. But when I learned you were in his classes spending time observing him. She shook her head sadly. I knew I had to intervene. David was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Really seeing me. The eyes, he whispered. You have Elena's eyes. How did I not see it before? I felt like I was drowning. All those feelings I'd developed, all those romantic notions, the dinner we'd planned. Oh God, I whispered. Oh God, what have I done? But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else emerged. For the first time in my life, I understood why I'd felt so drawn to literature, to deep thinking, to the search for meaning in everything. I understood why I'd felt invisible yet deeply perceptive, why I'd been drawn to this man not just romantically, but with a recognition that went deeper than attraction. I had been seeking my father. And he had been unconsciously recognizing his daughter. The good news, Maria said softly, is that nothing inappropriate actually happened. Some part of you both knew the truth, even if your conscious minds didn't understand it. David and I looked at each other across the space between us. No longer the space between potential lovers, but the space between a father and daughter who had found each other in the most unexpected way possible. Dad. I said tentatively, the word feeling strange but right. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. Hello, Sarah. I've been waiting 22 years to meet you. And as we embraced for the first time, I realized that while this wasn't the ending I'd expected, it was exactly the ending we both needed. I had found my father and he had found his daughter. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance at all. They're about family finding each other against impossible odds. The invisible girl was invisible no more.